Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second in our webinar series on creating dynamic CLIL classrooms for primary learners. I'm very, very pleased today to be in the company of Sarah Hilyard, who will be doing our webinar for us today. Before we begin, I'll just run you through a couple of points. Sarah, would you like to share your screen?
Sure.
Great. So, as I said, today's theme is the different languages of CLIL, language use in the CLIL classroom. For those of you who stay on, we'll be sharing a feedback form at the end, and at the end, you'll be able to claim a certificate of attendance. You'll also be able to re-watch the recording, and you'll be receiving the link to this during the webinar. We have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please do ask lots of questions as you go along. And you have the chat where you can interact with each other and us. So before we get started, I'll take a moment just to talk you through the British Council's work. So Sarah, if I could have the next slide, please. Our role as the international organism for cultural exchange and educational opportunity is to really build positive relations with the UK and France. And my work as head of English programs is very much about supporting English teaching and learning in France. We do that in different ways through our research, through events that bring people together and exchange ideas, through advice and guidance that we offer, and training courses like this one. The best way to keep up to date with everything we do is to sign up to our newsletter, our teacher development newsletter, and you can do that using the code on the screen. You also have our email address just there. On the next slide, I've just pulled out two really big projects that we have. The first one is our website, TeachingEnglish, which is used by over 6 million teachers around the world and includes resources, webinars, MOOCs, online courses, and so on. The second is a fantastic tool developed in partnership with the French Ministry of Education called Schools Connect. Now, this enables you to enter your school's details and find a partnership in the UK with a UK school. It's super easy to do, and the partnership can be anything you choose. It can be mobility, but it can also be pen friends or virtual classrooms or anything of the type. So I'd strongly encourage you to have a look at all those resources. So moving on then, I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Hilyard. Sarah Hilyard is a teacher trainer, a speaker at conferences, and a webinar presenter for pre-primary and primary teachers. She used to be an actress with an education group in Argentina, but at the moment she's working as a tutor on NILE's online course, Teaching English in Pre-Primary Education. She's the author of various student books and teachers' books and is here today to share her expertise in CLIL. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, George. Lovely introduction. And hello, everybody out there. Lovely. Thank you for joining us today. Bonjour to all of you who are in France. I don't know if I said that very well, but that's about all the French are going to hear from me today. But I'm very excited to be here with you. And I've managed to catch bits of Griselda's webinar last week. I don't know if you were here catching her webinar too, and she mentioned a few things that connected with this one today. So hopefully if you were at Griselda's webinar on increasing production in the classroom last week, then you will find some connections with this webinar today as well. So we'll be looking at the different languages of CLIL, language use in the classroom. We'll see how we use language to learn while the language itself is being learned. So I hope you're there, hope you're with me. But before we begin with the meaty bit of the session, I would like to ask you to share in the chat box, what is your passion? Apart from teaching, because I'm going to assume that you're all passionate about teaching. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a teacher. You wouldn't be here today. So apart from teaching, are you passionate about anything else? Wow, lovely passions: cooking, dance, traveling, English, sport, hiking, music, reading, painting, rugby, reading, photography, art museums, singing, walking, lovely stuff. Everyone's got a passion. Yes, those are our interests. My passion is tennis. Well, yeah, my passion is also my kids, of course. But let's say my passion is tennis. I like playing tennis. So what language do I need to know to be able to communicate about my passion? Something that I am very interested in. That is what I want to communicate with. So my main point of learning a language in the end is to be able to communicate something. So how can I communicate about my passion or something that I'm interested in? I need language to do so, language as a vehicle to talk about that passion or that interest of mine. So I would need to know words like tennis. I think that's easy in French if I wanted to talk with you about tennis. I think tennis is about almost the same, isn't it? I think it's a cognate word. Racket, similar, maybe. Raquette or something. Net, court, I believe is easy as well for me, knowing it in English, and in French it must be something similar. But I also need to know words like serve, forehand, backhand, set, smash, ball boy, ball guard, umpire. Okay, yeah, you're giving me all those words in the chat. Thank you. I might leave this session by learning some French myself, but I couldn't talk about my passion in French with you. I don't know these tennis words in French. I could not possibly communicate with any of you about tennis, the latest tennis matches. I couldn't have a conversation with you about the Roland Garros, which I probably pronounced really badly. I couldn't plan a tennis match to play with any of you. So I would need to know that content in your language as well, to be able to transform what I already know in my language into that other language. So that's a whole big process. So in this case, my passion or what I'm interested in becomes the content, and that tells me what language I need to learn to be able to communicate it. Call it passion, interest, content, whatever you like, but the content is going to drive the language. The interest drives the language. The teaching of the language then is organized around the demands of the subject rather than that of the target language, and it opens up language learning to a much wider context, that is CLIL. How many of you here are already teaching CLIL in English? Give me a me in the chat box if you're already teaching CLIL. Lovely. Most of you, yes, it looks like it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I bet you know this that I'm showing you on the screen. You may well know a CLIL lesson is built around these 4 integrated elements, the 4 C's. Probably know that already. Content, the specific knowledge, skills, understanding related to the subject. Culture, being exposed to the different perspectives and achieving shared understandings. Cognition, developing thinking skills, which are more abstract, that actually link the abstract and the concrete concepts. And last but not least at all, communication, using language to learn while learning to use language. The use of the foreign language to learn and to communicate the subject's content. And this is going to be our focus today. So in today's session, we're zooming into communication to focus on how language is used to learn while language is being learnt. We will look at the different types of languages in CLIL, with learners actively applying basic communication skills, subject-specific language, academic language within this dual-focused classroom. I will be giving you some samples of different types of languages so that you can actually see what these different types of languages actually sound like in a classroom, to make it a bit more visible for you, a bit more so that you can visualize it a bit more. And I will be giving you some ideas on how we can teach these different types of languages. That's the practical part. That's the best bit for me. That bit I like the most. So we will also discuss the place of your learner's own languages as well, which we sometimes call L1, which can be quite controversial sometimes, but sometimes also it's a big question that some teachers tend to have. So Elodie thinks this is great, fabulous. I hope you're all feeling that too. So why are we spending so much time, a whole hour, to look at language? Because we say in a CLIL lesson, we say that the topic of the lesson or content is more important than the language, because students are taught a subject rather than a specific language aim. So English is just a vehicle. It's just a means to something else. This takes us to see language as something extra sometimes. The target language becomes just an added bonus. So having said that, we're going to look at the less important aspect of CLIL maybe, or maybe not. So you may be asking yourselves, why do we want to look at this less important aspect? This just the vehicle for all this. But yes, it is important because it is overlooked sometimes. That's why, as the focus is placed on content many times, and then the language will come naturally. Okay, because we are focusing on starting with the content, deciding on the content first, it means that the language aspect can sometimes become a bit blurry or unfocused or overlooked. This is why it's important to stop at language to think about it. So here we have some big questions. How is language connected with content? How is language used in CLIL? Is it to learn? Is it to communicate? Is it the language that determines the subject matter, or the subject matter that determines the language? And is it about knowing language or knowing what to do with language? Wolf says language is not everything in education, but without language, everything is nothing in education. So how important is language then? We all use language. Mainstream content teachers, teachers of biology or maths or history, use language, but they don't stop to think of what language they're using, because that's the common language. So they're teaching the content. In a bilingual setting, we cannot take language for granted. It's something we have to think about too. It won't just come. So look at this work of art. We might be teaching art as a CLIL subject. This work of art will trigger some ideas. To get your creative lenses out now, please, and observe this work of art. Can you tell me, what can you see in this work of art? Landscape, colours, mountains, wolves, volcanoes, trees. What colours can you see? Purple, darkness, yellow, a rainbow, blue, red. Can you see any shapes? Circle, triangle. What are the lines like? Circle lines, parallel lines, curved, wavy. What do you think this is? If you had to put a name to it, what would it be? Landscape, waves, sunset, sunrise, two wolves, dawn, landscape, portal, bridge. Okay. Do you know the name of the artist? Who could be the artist? Who might the artist be? A pupil, a kid, a child, a student. Aha! The author of this piece of art is Alex Schneider, my son, who created this piece of art, which I love. So I'm using it here with you to tell me what you think about it. You described it beautifully, and I'm sure that he will be very proud of his work of art. But how old is he? He's 11 years old. I think he did this when he was 10, but he's 11 now. How did those ideas come to you? Through language. Language is a tool that structures that knowledge, those ideas, and it accesses and expresses that content or that knowledge when you need it. How do you access this knowledge that is stored through a language? Language brings knowledge and content to the light. I cannot know that content or that knowledge in your brains that you're thinking of if you don't put it into a language that we can both understand. It is not an extra. So language accesses knowledge for us, and language expresses content for us. What if I know the content, but I don't know the language to express it? This is what happens to me with tennis and French. I know all about it, but I can't express it. I can't share it with you. I can't show you what I know. I can't share. This is what happens to our students. They have prior knowledge, they have experiences, but maybe they cannot express it. So there they have their own languages, which they can use to express it. This knowledge may not be visible in the target language, in that language that we're trying to teach in our CLIL lessons. Language is used to learn as well as to communicate. So basically, we learn languages to communicate, to express ourselves. Language is used in CLIL both to communicate and to learn. We use language. We don't just know about language. Language is a skill to be used. You already know that it is the subject matter that determines the language needed to learn, rather than the other way around. Language teachers are usually trained to do the opposite. So language teachers, just traditional language class, maybe they don't really care about climate change as long as their students can produce the first conditional. If we plant more trees, we will reduce pollution. It is more important that the grammar is correct than actually teaching the children about how we can reduce pollution. For a CLIL teacher, it is very important that the students understand the content, that they actually know how to reduce pollution, not just use that grammar sentence correctly. So I hope I've convinced you that language is not just an added bonus, because it is the way that you're going to be driving that content or that knowledge to be able to use what you know, to be able to use that language. So the languages of CLIL, when we come straight into this now, we're getting there. What we have is BICS and CALP, which I'm sure you must have heard of. They're not names for terrible diseases or anything. We have what we call these basic interpersonal communication skills, everyday conversational skills, and we have cognitive, academic, language proficiency, more specific, more academic speech. Consider photosynthesis. If I say to someone, oh, look at how green those leaves are, that's a different style of language that might come up in more conversational speech than if I was talking about the process of plants and I used a sentence like, plants make their own food by using sunlight, water, and air in a process called photosynthesis. It is not a typical example of basic language, but it is much more language that is essential in a CLIL class. Okay, so we have the specialized vocabulary and terminology linked to the content, which is the subject-specific language: plant, leaf, sunlight, water, air, oxygen, carbon dioxide. And we have general academic language, more formal, more structured language. And the role of the learner's first language will also come into play all the time, because they might know a lot of content and a lot of knowledge in their brain, maybe in their language, and they need to put that into another language. So their L1 is always playing a part, and the different L1s in your classroom. So we know that the languages in CLIL have a multi-dimensional nature. So we have BICS and CALP, where we distinguish between basic interpersonal communication skills and cognitive academic proficiency. So we have everyday language for social situations, communicating, greeting, small talk, expressing likes and dislikes. Yes, Christopher, you can read Cummins, excellent, that's really good. Suggestion for reading to learn more about this. And cognitive academic language proficiency, in very broad terms, is this academic language required for understanding and communicating more complex academic concepts. We use it for functions like listing, defining, classifying, predicting. Now, BICS are much easier to acquire. because they're things that we're going to be listening to a lot. It's going to be very interactive. These are usually high frequency, simple grammar, simple structures. Students learn them. There's visual clues. There's gestures, facial expressions to communicate. BICS. They're not too demanding, but without it, we wouldn't be able to understand or be understood by others. So in other words, BICS is the foundation upon which other communication skills are going to be built, where CALP includes that ability to talk, read, write, understand, which is much less familiar, more abstract. There is less opportunities for interaction in this type of language. So you might be listening to a lecture, for example, or reading a text, or watching a video about seeds, and you cannot interact with the person talking in the video, or it might be them giving their own oral presentation, but much more complex in defining or classifying or predicting, more sophisticated vocabulary. In a CLIL classroom, your students need both a social language to function in everyday situations, social classroom language, and the academic language for the different subject areas. Okay. So if I show you these examples, can you tell me which of these is BICS and which is CALP? If you want, just write a B or a K in the chat box as I ask you. What would you say? Good morning, how are you? What's that? B or K? BICS or CALP? Yes, of course. Sharks live in the ocean. It's their habitat. We're talking about young learners. Okay, CALPs, okay, because we're talking about a habitat, the ocean, okay. Carrots, onions, and potatoes are vegetables. If we're talking about small children, vegetable, yeah, being able to classify fruits and vegetables. I like apples. Do you like apples? Yeah, that's BICS. Get your books, please. That's BICS. Yes, B should be in the chat box because that's going to be an instruction. Many classroom instructions or commands are going to be BICS, okay, because that's classroom language, instructions given by the teacher, basic interpersonal communication skills. But listen up. What if I say, analyze this data and record your reasoning? It is still an instruction, a command given by the teacher, but not all teacher instructions fit neatly into BICS. Some instructional language can require more complex, more academic, more abstract concepts. So basically, teacher instructions can be BICS when they're more routine or simple, but many of them fall under CALP due to their complexity. Okay, if I had said, read this information and write about it, it would be one thing. But if I'm saying, analyze this data, record your reasoning, those are big words. Okay, so I wanted to get through that first because these are two big languages in CLIL, the big acronyms. So what we're going to go into now is these three different types of languages, which are basic communication skills, and we're going to look at how we teach them, but also examples of this kind of language again. So we said that this is the kind of language that students use for social everyday interaction or conversational survival, or we also call them playground English, or very simple instructions or classroom language. These are chunks of language usually that have a function, a purpose for using the language. What are they there for? Such as borrowing a school item. Okay, can I have a crayon, please? Or asking for help. Can you tie my shoelaces, please? Or requesting, can I have some water, please? Can I sit at your table? These are language functions. Look at the use of the word table, because we'll see how this word changes according to the type of language that we use. Can I sit at your table is used to mean one thing, table, but then we might be using it in different ways in different types of languages. So this is the kind of language that you will hear in a classroom when we're talking about basic communication skills. But how do we teach this type of language? It's probably cognitively undemanding, we said, because it is revised once and again in everyday interaction and in natural situations. It takes place inside or outside the classroom, and students have frequent exposure to this type of language, and it includes language that is context embedded. Students can rely on cues that are gestures or facial expressions or tones of voice. So comprehension is relatively simple. So what do? First, we want to make sure that we're clear about what language we want to hear in our classrooms. Students need to know what language we're expecting. first of all, have a list of typical requests displayed on a poster on the wall, for example. And you can add to it as you notice more coming up. That kind of language that you want to hear in your classroom, or that you want your students to understand in your classroom. So these will be repeated, will be in routines, but you can also do simple games to focus on this communicative language, to let students practice this communicative language in engaging ways. So for example, polite, Simon says, is a way to teach students to request things politely. So you're going to be practicing this so that then they can use it in everyday situations, in real situations, but you're going to practice it in a game because it makes it a safe space. It makes it a place where students can rehearse first that language that they will use in the classroom. For example, stand up. No one does it. Touch your head, please. Everyone does it. Get your book out of your bag. No one does that. Sit down, please. So everyone sits down. We don't do it if we don't say please. Do it if we say please. Let students take turns being Simon, saying please or not saying please for polite or impolite requests. So you practice that language, probably relying on those examples on the poster that you created so that they can choose from that poster a few sentences first. Or if you're teaching very young learners or young learners who are not reading yet, you can always do it by teaching them that language and having them play that game without needing that written reference. If they're not reading yet, that's fine too. The power of prediction. Use the request questions that are on your wall and see how important it is to have that language on your wall if your students are reading already. Student A is going to make a request, for example. Can you lend me your car, please? Okay, they might come up with that request. Can you lend me your car, please? That question. But they're going to first predict, and they're going to write down the response that they're going to predict they're going to get from their partner. They're going to write yes or no. Okay, so yes or no questions. They're going to write yes or no. They make the request, they ask the question to their partner and wait for the response. And then they reveal what they have written to show the power of prediction. So, can you lend me your car, please? And they wait for the answer. No. And then they show yes or no. Okay, and check whether their predictions are correct or not. So they reveal it. Can I work with you? Yes. Yeah, I wrote yes as well. So we're checking the prediction, but really we're using that game for them to ask for things and start to use that communicative language. Yes, and Sophie, sometimes it's fun with tone of voice. Yeah, playing with the tone of voice, absolutely, and using those different tones of voice for playing around with language. Totally, yes. So then we come on to subject-specific language. So communicative language is something that's going to be there most of the time. Students are going to hear it a lot. They're going to use it a lot. You can use some intentional moments to get them to practice it so they can make it more their own when they need it. But then there's the subject-specific language, which is a big thing in CLIL, because this is the language that is directly tied to the content. It is more specialized. It's the specific terminology and vocabulary like photosynthesis, plant, leaf, sunlight, air, oxygen, carbon dioxide, any language that is related to the content of the lesson. We looked at a piece of art before. We said circle, square, triangle, rectangle, oval, wavy line, straight line, when looking at artworks. Honorine, you're asking, is the power of prediction a traditional game? Well, not really. I don't think it's a traditional game. Not that I know of it as a traditional game. I just know it as a language game, to be honest, but it might be. We'll have to find out. So coming back to subject-specific language, look at the use of the word table here. We have plus, equals, times tables. A table can be a subject-specific word in maths, not only the piece of furniture we use to write on. We can usually tell quite easily which are the subject-specific words because they're the key words. We tend to highlight them in course books or they're very clear on your lesson plans. So you've got the language of questions as well that includes subject-specific language and allows us to elicit subject-specific language from the students. You've got closed questions and open questions, and that's a whole other world that I don't have time to go into today. But the language of questioning is also a big thing in CLIL. But how do we teach this subject-specific language? So what a teacher wants to do is to make this language very accessible to students. For very young learners or young learners, it's important to make it really accessible in a way that you pre-teach the key vocabulary, you use visuals to support the understanding, diagrams with labels. We want your students to experience new words and concepts multiple times in a variety of ways. There is always going to be a progression. Don't expect your students to learn this subject-specific language on the first lesson because you've taught it, you feel like you've taught it. This is going to take time. There's going to be a gradual progression for learning the subject-specific language. Too often we expect them to understand things just because we taught it once. So you want students to play and interact with language a lot. So practice, 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 and expose them to a lot of language. Okay. Good. Agatha says memory game is efficient. Yeah, memory games. Yeah, those are fine. Yeah, as well. Good. Absolutely. Okay, and Stefan asks, does that mean we do a vocab-focused lesson at the beginning? Well, not necessarily. You could. It depends how you're planning out your lessons. I don't think there's a straightforward answer to that. You might have vocabulary-focused lessons at the beginning to pre-teach, if that's, I think that's where your question is coming from, because I said pre-teach. So it could be if you wanted to, but I would always put it in context. Yeah, not pre-teach isolated words. I wouldn't do that. I would always put those words in context and make sure they make sense, so that then they become words that students can connect to and link to, and they've heard them before, they've seen a picture of it before in a context. But I wouldn't pre-teach just in a way that is, okay, what's this? It's an apple. What's this? It's a pear. What's this? It's a banana. Yeah, these grow on trees or whatever. Okay, so you don't want to do that, but you want to give it a context. So we want to understand that there's that natural gradual progression regarding your students' acquisition of this language. And for all of these different CLIL languages, really, week after week and month after month, there will be that gradual progression, because knowing means more than recognizing a word or knowing how to pronounce a word. It is more than reproducing that dictionary definition. What does it mean to know a word? So there is a lot, you need to, lots of layers of understanding and lots of layers of knowing to say, I know this word. So getting to really know a piece of language and to be able to use it takes a long process. It means coming across words again and again in different contexts, okay, repeatedly. So some examples to do this. Visuals, of course, always come in very handy. Games and even drama. So here I've got a game, bingo. You can have your students make a small bingo grid, maybe of around 6 squares, let's say, at the end of a lesson, and ask your students to write or draw 6 important words of that topic. So if your students are not reading and writing yet, maybe it's making drawings, and they choose the most important words from that topic and have them write them or draw them in that bingo grid that they've created. Then you play bingo, and students would have had to think of those subject-specific words themselves. And then if they're writing, they will be paying attention to spelling as well. So that's another thing that's useful when you integrate games into your classroom, because you've got different areas to look at, whether it's writing, spelling, then it's reading it. And they will be hearing those keywords again as you call the keywords out. So there's lots of exposure and there's lots of practice in just one game. Freeze frames are always fun to do because it could be a still image, like a photograph. So you could have learners walk around the space. You call out a number of learners to get together. So if you say 3, they have to make groups of 3. If you say 4, they have to make groups of 4. And give them a concept that they have to embody or act out. So for example, I could say forces, if that's what we're learning about, forces. So like push and pull, for example. So they would have to role play their own daily experiences, daily actions of forces from the moment they get up to the moment they get to school, for example. So pushing the cover off the bed, or pulling the bedroom door, or pushing the door closed, or being pulled along while you take the dog out for the morning walk, or someone pushing someone over, or, I don't know, pushing a broken down car, or pulling a friend away from a fight. Pushing and pulling actions that happen in real life. So then you think of the situation, the scenario, and then they've got to embody it, and they act that out. And when you say freeze, freeze, they have to freeze in that position, pushing or pulling. And it might be, you can use a freeze frame so that your students describe what they're doing, use a conversation as they're doing it, or it could be guessing. So the rest of the class could be asked to say what they think is happening in this freeze frame. And you could photograph your students and put it on a poster if you're allowed to take photographs of your students, and have labels for push or pull, push or pull. And this will act again as a visual prompt for that concept, for the concept of forces in this case, so that they remember when they were doing that activity themselves, this is what they were using as examples of push or pull. So involving drama enables learners to make direct personal connections and embodying these concepts using their own experiences. And of course, use a lot of visuals, a lot of diagrams, graphic organizers, word walls, anchor charts. And here goes, anchor charts. I wonder, do any of you already use anchor charts in your classrooms? You might not know what I'm talking about, and that's fine as well. So just be honest, give me a yes if you use it, no if you don't know what I'm going on about or you don't use them. You might not be aware of their existence, and that's fine too, so just be honest. Okay, so wow, there are lots of no's, and that's a great thing. That's fabulous, because that means I'm going to be introducing something that is new for you, and you might like to take it away and you might like to use them. So I'm going to stop at anchor charts for a bit, because I find that anchor charts are really, really useful in the classroom. And this is why you're going to be getting a post-webinar task that is connected with anchor charts. So at the end of the webinar, you will get a link to a post-webinar task to complete. So make sure you're listening carefully at this bit. Okay, listening carefully, everyone. All right. Anchor charts. They don't only help you explain a concept, but it also allows students to chip in with their own suggestions, making learning visual and making learning their own. It helps to highlight important bits. It serves as a visual aide-memoire of the students, and the word visual is very important. Remember that when you're teaching CLIL, you want to make those more abstract concepts, or concepts that children can't really touch, like the wings of a butterfly. You want to make them a bit more concrete for them, bring them to them a bit closer. So it could be, you could be teaching quite abstract concepts or complex concepts. So it's not just the same as teaching language with flashcards. Okay, so here we have some examples of anchor charts. So it's a tool that you use to support your instruction. It's an anchor. They may be made with the teacher, but always with the students. You don't make it at home, Pinterest perfect, and then come and bring it to class and stick it on the wall as a poster. That's not the aim of an anchor chart. The aim of an anchor chart is you make it with your students, so that then that is created by everyone and everyone owns it. Okay. So Sandy says she uses vocabulary flowers. That is beautiful. I can imagine how lovely a vocabulary flower must look. Mind map, Sophie, that's excellent. Yes, Melanie, young children age of 6. Do you mean, when you say young learners age 6, do you mean they're not reading? Because that could be a big point there. Okay. Oh, someone, Emmanuel, you're saying something in French. Makes me think of fleur lexicale. Okay, Adriana? Oh, is that a lexical flower? Ah, did I get that right? Is that a lexical flower? Carte mentale, does that mean like a mental map, or yeah, word map maybe? Yeah. A word on each piece of furniture in the classroom. That's nice. Flower, yeah. Okay. I use, Christopher says, I use anchor charts in French, but not in English because I can use written words in French, but not in English yet. Therefore, I'd have to use pictures. Fab. For your 7-year-old students. Yes. If they can't read. Excellent. I was expecting that question. Sound wall. Ooh, an ace, sorry. Sound wall. That's lovely. Sound walls, Salome. Ooh, can you tell us more about your sound walls? Those of you who are saying sound walls, can you tell us a bit more about that? Emmanuel says interactive notebooks. Fabulous stuff. Okay, so the idea is that as you teach your lesson, you're creating the anchor chart with the students. It doesn't have to look perfect because it's made in class with your students, and you can make anchor charts for literally anything and in many different ways. So yes, your questions about using it with children who can't read yet is also useful. You can make a chart for geometric shapes, difference between the perimeter and area, how to multiply and divide fractions. You can use anchor charts for anything you want, and depending on how you want to do it. So Anais says, recording the words and put it as a QR code under a picture. That is just beautiful. Okay, so you have pictures on the anchor chart and you have a QR code under each picture, if I'm understanding correctly. And that QR code will take you to a recording of the word. That's lovely. But you need tablets, yes, of course, you need the technology to be able to do that. Lovely, but that's a great idea. So here we have a very visual one using the outline of the word. So the butterfly, there's an outline of a butterfly. It could be a snowman, it could be a tree, it could be whatever topic you're working on. You start with the outline and you want your students to tell you words that connect with that. So again, I work a lot with pre-primary teachers. That's really my favorite place to be, a pre-primary classroom, and we don't use reading or writing in a pre-primary classroom, and these things can be created perfectly well with pictures. Children are very creative about how to make pictures work to describe what they're talking about, so they can really do that very well. And I'm just going to if I can do this, I'm going to just take my background away so that I can show you something that my daughter Mila did, because I asked her to help me to create this anchor chart to show you today. We did it especially for you guys. So this anchor chart is what do we get from trees, and my 7-year-old daughter helped me to write the words. She was just copying the words, of course, because she doesn't write yet on her own, but what she did was she said, can I draw them? And I said, yeah, of course you can draw them. So she drew an apple. She drew oxygen. I would have never thought how you would draw oxygen. Money, paper, pencil, box, orange, wood, chair, all things you get from trees. And so she made the pictures for that too. So it could perfectly well be what do we get from trees, just to have the kind of title there. But then these could be pictures straight away without the words. Now, if you are allowed to have words, I would always label, because I think it is good for students to see the picture and connect the word with the picture, even if they're not supposed to be learning to read or they're not proficient readers yet. That will always help them to start connecting letters with sounds and words with pictures. So that is part of pre-literacy. So I think it's always a good idea to also have the words, but if that's not a possibility, pictures are always fine. And as long as the children are making it with you, they will recognize that that blob means oxygen. If I had done the blob, maybe they don't recognize that that's oxygen, but when it comes from them, they will remember that that means oxygen. Okay. Real objects, yes, Agatha. Real objects are also interesting when it is a possibility, absolutely. So you can make an anchor chart with real objects. So it could be you're working with what things are made of. So plastic, wood to metal. You might stick a small metal toy car to your anchor chart, or you may stick an ice lolly stick to your wood part, or a plastic straw to the plastic part. So little objects that you can add to it, or have plastic, those bags, those plastic envelopes, and children can place things inside those bags to classify the different types of materials. Okay. Word clouds. If you're using reading again, Lapbook, that sounds great. So the teacher finds pictures, says Clementine, before making the anchor charts with the children and uses the ones they say. Yes, you can also do that. Bring in pictures, a mix of pictures, some that would go in the anchor chart and some that won't. So you're also having them classify, sort, which of these do we get from trees, which don't we? Okay, so they'll have to have a think about that. Yes, so, and depending on the age, because you're talking about 3-4-year-olds, so you will probably not give them too many options and not too many wrong options, so that they can tell which are the pictures that are going to go. Yes, because sometimes their drawings are not recognizable. Absolutely. So if you do have pre-primaries, 3 or 4-year-olds that young, yes, draw pictures that you printed from a computer or from magazines would be a really good option. Absolutely. So some of you are saying you would like to try it. If you're going to try it, I would say start small, start really small. Just think of one anchor chart with not too many language items on it and start there. The good thing about anchor charts is that you can also add. So when my students learn more about what we get from trees, we will add more things to the anchor charts. And at the end of the unit or the end of the project, the CLIL project, we're going to have a huge tree full of leaves that tells us all the things that we've learned. So we can see progression, making learning visible. From the beginning, the tree had no leaves, to the end, full of leaves with all the things that we've learned. So it's a really nice way of looking at progression as well. Need to move on, looking at time. So students need to be able to show what they know about the subject. Second, they need to be able to be pushed to develop their language skills and use more complex language to express complex ideas. So how sometimes we go around saying things like, I need the thingy-majiggy to do the what's it. Yeah, thingy-majiggy, what's it? What are those words? Let's be specific. What is a more precise word, if you can tell me in the chat box, for thing? What might be another word for thing that is more precise? Element, for example. Good, Anna. What would be a better word for right? Yes, or object, Margot. Excellent. Or what's a better word for write? If I say write this in your box, write, what could be a better word? Copy, note, describe, record this in your notebook. For guess, what can I say instead of guess if I wanted to use a proper big word for guess? Imagine, figure out, yeah, predict, yeah, I could ask them to predict. Or a more precise word for proof could be evidence, for example. So general academic language is not discipline specific. It goes beyond specific vocabulary, focuses on how we construct ideas, how we engage in more formal communication. It's language that is related to the thinking processes and the skills that are involved in the tasks, like identifying, comparing, defining, asking questions, describing, predicting, sequencing, categorizing. They go across the curriculum. So it's going to be general language, not subject specific. So we'll take a look at these language functions again for more academic purposes, things like predicting or inferring. You're going to be using language like I think, because, or the language of explaining, because or the shadow is big because I'm close. That's the language of explaining. Or the language of comparison. This table measures 5 centimeters more than this table. Or the language of observing. This cube has 6 faces and 2 edges, or I can see, or in the background there is. Or ordering and sequencing, first, next, then, finally. First it's an egg, next it's a caterpillar, then it's a chrysalis, and finally it's a butterfly. Papillon, is it? I'm thinking of all language that would be perhaps suitable in a young learner classroom, okay? Because you can get much more complex if you wanted to, using things like however or therefore. It is important to consider, I could say, but those, I don't think we would hear them very much in a primary classroom. So notice the use of table here. Record the data in a table. It's different here again, okay? How do we teach this? Because students don't simply pick up this general type of language. So they need to be ready to transfer it to different situations, use it correctly, but it's much more cognitively demanding than the other types of language. So we want to make it explicit and quite systematic. So be very patient, allow extra time for children to assimilate this information, slow down, there will be a big difference between how they learn everyday basic communication skills than general academic language. But if you have sentence frames or anchor charts or SOS boards with the language children need, that will help them a lot with this general academic language. Or expert role plays where students perform a role play about a topic using language like, let's say they become scientists. Okay, now you become scientists. Give them a prop if you want, so that they can show that they're scientists, or mathematicians, or historians, or artists, whatever. And if they're scientists, perhaps you might say, let's observe the growing of this plant. So if they're a scientist, that might be language that they're going to use in their expert role plays. They'll say, let's observe the growing of this plant. First, da 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 da, then da da da, next, da da da, finally. So they'll be using the language of sequencing to talk about that. But that might happen in any of those topics that you're going to be teaching. So it's not subject specific, because you can use sequencing in many different subjects that you're going to be using. Maths, science, art processes, okay? Be the teacher. So what you can do is you shout out, be the teacher, and students know that they have to turn to the person next to them to pair up with their elbow buddy, for example. One becomes the teacher, one becomes the student, and they give them a role to take on. For example, classify these objects. So that means put these objects in groups, but we're using the word classify instead, because they're going to be hearing you using those words a lot. Use this academic language if your students are at the level, of course, yeah? You're always going to be using simplified language for the younger ones, and a bit more complex for those older students. But moving again into anchor charts very quickly, they're so useful. You can also use them for general academic language as well. So have this on your wall as well, if this is something that you think that will be very useful for your students to be able to incorporate this academic language. First, next, then finally, you'll keep it up there because you will be using this language not only to talk about the life cycle of the butterfly, but also, or the caterpillar, but also maths, also to talk about art processes, also to talk about a story, what happened first and next in a story. So this is going to happen throughout different subjects, okay? So remember, you're going to have a post-webinar activity that is got to do with anchor charts. But then moving into the role of your learners' own languages, this is a huge thing. It's a difficult issue because there may be many mother tongues in your classroom at the same time. And attitudes and beliefs about using students' own language can vary considerably. So have a little think. Do you use students' language in the classroom? Do your students use the language? How do you feel about there being L1 in the classroom? How do your students feel about it? There many times that this is a big question I get from teachers. So as a rule of thumb, I would say that you would want to use as much L2 as possible, give as much exposure as possible, have students use as much L2 as possible, of course, use as much English as possible, promote as much English as possible in the classroom. But they will be immersed in a CLIL classroom, of course, so they're immersed, there will be a lot of English. But then having said that, there still is space for your students' own languages. So while the goal is to maximize English in that classroom, to learn that language, L1 has a strategic role. We know that when we're giving instructions, if it saves time, maybe another language can be used. But remember, a lot of the general academic language will come through in what embedded in your instructions. Cognates help students assimilate words in their language and in English. I think tennis is a cognate in French. Animal, I think, is similar. Table, I think, is similar, isn't it? Insects, is insect similar in French? There are loads of words that we use in English that are actually French. Croissant, chef, brunette. There are loads of words in French that we use in English that is actually French. So there are lots of words in common. Bring their language into the classroom as well, on purpose, intentionally. Sometimes to build rapport with your students, to build positive relationships, sometimes translating. Many teachers recognize that finding connections really helps, and it's a good idea to ask students for translations. Sharing objectives of the lesson, having conversations with students about the why we're doing this, to ensure proper understanding on the part of the students. If we're in PE and doing physical activities in English, there will be a need to look out for our bodies. So you need to make sure that there is the safety there. Okay, there is a safety matter there as well. Isabel says it looks like English, but never the same sound. Yes, the sounds are going to change. Okay, yes, absolutely. Complex activities where students need to give reasons for their choices, because sometimes it can be too consuming to do in L2 in English, especially at the start of the first CLIL years. More so, that is not the main objective. And I also hear that you need to respect the French common core of knowledge that needs to be acquired by each of your students at the end of compulsory education. Is that correct? Your students have to know the subject-specific language in French too, right? I think I grasped that, yes. So L1 is very valuable, and I caught Griselda in her webinar last week saying that there is a judicious use of L1 that promotes effective language acquisition, and there is a role for L1 as well. So I think we agree with that in terms of bringing L1 into the classroom. There are loads of schools, centres, institutes that still work with the no L1 in the classroom, but we now know that L1 does help. Remember, the content that we have in our brains is actually in a language, but we just need to be able to put it into other languages as well, to be able to speak to more people around the world and communicate with more people. But the content is there in a language. Fake friends, Herb, thank you. So what we've done today is we've discussed the 4 C's of CLIL and focused on communication. We explored different types of language in the CLIL classroom, and we looked at a few samples of language. What does it sound like? What does it look like? And also a few ideas of how to teach them. So I started the session saying content is more important than language in a CLIL classroom, but don't forget that language is not everything in education, but without language, everything is nothing in education. So content, I'm afraid, would come down to nothing without language. So thank you for your attention. Remember that you now have that link to click on. You can see the recordings of the webinars there, and you will have your post-webinar activities to consolidate your learning, in this case through anchor charts. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Lovely stuff. Thanks for sharing as well. You shared a lot in the chat box. That was really lovely to read your contributions. That was fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was absolutely thrilling. Thank you. And it was wonderful to see everyone's contributions. On the screen, as you can see, everybody, you can see the feedback form that Tom has just put in the chat as well. You need to complete this feedback form in order to get the link to download your certificate. So please do make sure you submit it and claim your certificate before the 8th of December. Just one question here for you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Can you clarify the difference between general academic language and CLAP?
Okay, so good. So we've got, I would think of it like two different frameworks, really. So you've got the BICS and CALP framework, where you've got that basic communication skills, and you've got those more that academic proficiency language. So that's one framework to look at it. And then it's a different framework when you look at those three different subject-specific language, the basic communication skills, and the general academic language. So I would say they're two different frameworks, but they do go hand in hand. They do clash. So it's not two different things. Absolutely not. They do work together. So really, yes, general academic language would sound a lot like CALP, absolutely, because you would have more complex language. But if you want, you would actually include in CALP, we also looked at things like sharks live in the ocean, that's their habitat. So that is actually going to be subject specific though, because you're only going to use that with that content. You're not going to use that in a different subject. You're actually learning about that content. So it is quite subject specific. But in the other case of general academic language, then that's going to be general, something that you can use throughout all the different subjects. I hope that's clear.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you. And there were so many questions that were answered by people, by yourself during the webinar from the chat. So
yeah,
thank you.
lovely
It's
to
been
see how
wonderful.
everybody was contributing to answering the questions in the chat. So thanks everyone for pitching in. It was really nice to see all your different ideas and what you do and how you use things. So that was really nice. Thank you very much, George, and thank you, NILE and the British Council and everybody out there.
Thank you, as we say, thank you to you for this wonderful presentation, and thank you for NILE for their support in organising it. The links are in the chat, and they'll be coming at you in the follow-up webinar email as well. Please do complete the form, and we'll see you next week for looking at heterogeneous groups and how to optimize learning when you have lots of different learners in the same classroom. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sarah. See you next week.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.